Under the cover of night, while the world slumbered, Somalia faced an insidious invasion by ruthless foreign entities along its shores, heavily disrupting the country's fish population, the very essence of Somalian livelihoods. Branded as pirates, the country faced a racist stereotypical makeup from the media, which intentionally hid the evil truth about Somali pirates. The arrival of Western fishing fleets spelled disaster for Somalian fishermen. They found it increasingly difficult to compete with the industrial-scale operations of their Western counterparts. As a result, families that once relied on fishing struggled to make ends meet. What a disaster! And with fish stocks dwindling, the local population faced a severe threat to their food security. Fish, once a staple in their diet, became scarce and unaffordable. The major culprits behind the overfishing in Somalia are foreign fishing vessels, particularly those from Iran, Yemen, and Europe, including Spain. These vessels have been illegally exploiting the fish stocks in Somali waters on a massive scale. Can you imagine the horror faced by mothers and children when hit with such calamity? Charles Clover, in his book At the End of the Line, How Overfishing is Changing the World in What We Eat, points out that the most suspicious part of the situation is the presence of these vessels in Somalian waters to begin with. The situation is dire, and if it does not change, locals fear that the piracy may resurface as their only means of survival. And if this is not enough, wait till you hear the next one. Somalia has been a victim of toxic and nuclear waste dumping for decades. The waste dumped along Somalia's coast includes uranium radioactive waste, lead, cadmium, mercury, and other toxic waste. The dumping of toxic waste in Somali waters has been reported since the collapse of the Mohammed Siad Barre military regime in 1991. European countries, predominantly Spain, Italy, Greece, and eventually the United Kingdom and others, are responsible for this illegal dumping. The waste issue grew dramatically after the Somali Civil War in the 1990s, when European companies turned to Somalia as an extremely cheap place to get rid of their toxins. The huge waves that battered northern Somalia after the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami were initially believed to have stirred up illegally dumped toxic and nuclear waste. Did you know that European countries, predominantly Spain, Italy, Greece, and eventually the United Kingdom, are responsible for this illegal dumping? The 'Ndrangheta, a criminal organization from Calabria, Italy, has been involved in radioactive waste dumping since the 1980s. Ships with toxic and radioactive waste were sunk off the Italian coast. In addition, vessels were allegedly sent to Somalia and other developing countries with toxic waste, including radioactive waste cargoes, which were either sunk with the ship or buried on land. Somalia has been a dangerous place for journalists, with 54 journalists murdered over the past decade. But have you ever heard about Ilaria Alpai, the journalist who was close to unveiling the truth about the exploitation of the country? She was investigating how Western exporters were also shipping guns and ammunition during Somalia's civil war. This goes to show the unsuccessful cover-up by the exploiters of the country. She was an Italian journalist in Somalia for the Italian public television broadcaster RAI. She arrived in Somalia for the first time in December 1992 to follow the peace mission Restore Hope, coordinated and promoted by the United Nations to put an end to the civil war that broke out in 1991 after the fall of the Siad Barre. At the time of her murder, she was following a case of weapon and illegal toxic waste traffic, in which she believed also the Italian army and other institutions were involved. This goes to show the unsuccessful cover-up by the exploiters of the country. And did you know, in 2009, Francesco Fanti, a former 'Ndrangheta member, claimed that Ilaria Alpai and her cameraman were murdered because they had seen toxic waste shipped by the Ndrangheta arrive in Bosaso, Somalia. The most recent victim is TV journalist Mohammed Issei Hassan, who was killed on October 29, 2022 in a car bombing, while he and others were covering another explosion in the capital, Mogadishu. The twin bombings killed more than 100 people in total. What do you think? Is this not enough to instill fear into the civilians and render them unable to speak out? The killing of brave men and women in Somalia who strive to illuminate the truth for the world to see is a tragic reminder of the immense risk they face in pursuit of justice and accountability. During the Cold War, the United States supported Siad Barre's regime as a bulwark against the Soviet influence in the region. After the collapse of Siad Barre's regime, Western countries turned to Somalia as a place to dump their toxic waste. They then supplied ammunition and guns to the Somalians, which prolonged their civil war. Tragically, this environmental exploitation was coupled with the supply of ammunition and firearms to various fractions within Somalia, a move that further exacerbated and prolonged the already devastating civil war. One tragic instance where the supplied weapons exacerbated the situation in Somalia occurred during the infamous Battle of Mogadishu in 1993. This battle, part of Operation Gothic Serpent, was a United States-led mission aimed at capturing a Somali warlord, Mohammed Farah Adid, and his lieutenants. The downing of the helicopters led to a desperate rescue mission during which U.S. forces faced intense gunfire and street-to-street fighting. Tragically, 18 American soldiers were killed and more than 70 were wounded during this operation. Additionally, estimates suggest that hundreds of Somali lost their lives, with many more injured as a result of this conflict. This catastrophic event, depicted in the book and film Black Hawk Down, stands as a poignant reminder of how the proliferation of weapons can escalate conflicts and lead to devastating consequences for both foreign military personnel and the local population. It highlights the importance of responsible arms control and diplomacy to prevent such tragedies in the future. One cannot discuss the plight of the Somali people without addressing the very source of their suffering. Somalia's land and water supply have been systematically poisoned by the clandestine dumping of nuclear waste and toxic substances. Reports reveal a staggering increase in cancer cases across Somalia. Leukemia, thyroid, and lung cancers have become shockingly prevalent due to the prolonged exposure to deadly radiation. Perhaps the most heart-wrenching aspect of this tragedy is the alarming rise in birth defects and deformities. Pregnant women exposed to the toxic cocktail that lingers in their environment are giving birth to children with severe and often life-altering deformities. Have you ever considered the emotions parents experience when they have children with deformities and the fear of society's rejection due to those deformities? Behind the statistics lie the silent struggles of Somali families. They grapple with the emotional and physical toll of caring for loved ones who face these debilitating diseases and deformities. As we reflect on the diseases, deformities, and suffering faced by the Somali people, we must acknowledge our shared responsibility to prevent such exploitation in the future. When we think of pirates, our mind often conjures images of swashbuckling adventurers sailing the high seas in search of treasure, exotic islands, and daring escapades. This romanticized image of piracy has been perpetuated for centuries by literature, movies, and folklore. However, when we turn our attention to the Somali pirates of the modern era, we find that the reality of their lives is far removed from the myths. The pirates often employ small, fast boats, such as skiffs, armed with automatic weapons and rocket-propelled grenades. These boats are agile and allow pirates to approach and board larger vessels with ease. Once this is acquired, They then select their targets carefully. They typically focus on cargo vessels, fishing boats, and sometimes even luxury yachts. Their choice of target depends on the factors like perceived wealth and ease of hijacking. Once a target is identified, pirates approach it under the cover of darkness. They use grappling hooks and ladders to board the vessel. Pirates then take the crew hostage, often using intimidation and violence to gain control. After gaining control of the vessel and crew, pirates demand ransom payments for the release. Negotiations can be lengthy and complex, often involving intermediaries who facilitate communication with the ship's owners or issuers. The incident that occurred from 2010 to 2012 on the MV Iceberg hostage ordeal, crew members were held captive for 1,174 days. The hostages faced unimaginable hardships, including physical and psychological strain. Negotiating their release was a lengthy and challenging process, involving complex ransom negotiations and intermediaries. Imagine you were a government official tasked with addressing the issue of piracy. What policies would you implement to combat this problem? Will you treat the pirates with mercy or tackle the exploiters with the risk of being harmed? Piracy was breathed into Somalia by their exploiters and not by choice, as media likes to portray them. They praised Captain Phillips for his bravery in the Maersk, Alabama hijacking in 2009, and all the Somalians could do is sit and watch as the media flooded them with accusations of piracy, not knowing the long line of exploitation that constituted their actions.